A recent announcement from the CCFR has left many in the firearms community feeling betrayed. Let's have a look. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be discussing the CCFR's recent Red Alert call to action video, which has much of the firearms community up in arms, and not in a good way. For those who haven't watched it, the CCFR announced a new plan of action against the Liberal government in an attempt to counter the impending amnesty deadline and the proposed rollout of the assault-style confiscation program. And the CCFR's plan is grandfathering.
Hey everybody, big call to action right now, Red Alert. There's an opportunity for all of you to participate in trying to save your newly prohibited firearms, as they call them, from confiscation and destruction. Now, what this document does is it lays out the case for grandfathering, how it would work, and telling the government things that it should probably know, even though some parts of this government are brand new, like the Canadian government are very familiar with grandfathering, because there's a lot of grandfathering that's already been done and still in place today, and all of the political reasons why this is a win for them. And there are real reasons. It's not talking points, it's not any of that stuff.
Their brief is a little over 5 pages long, and it details a bit more than just the specifics of the grandfathering plan, but I'll put the section on grandfathering on screen if you want to read it. What they're essentially proposing here is very similar to current grandfathering schemes like the 12.6 license conditions. And they are encouraging the government to drop the wasteful spending of the confiscation program in favor of allowing anyone who has a newly prohibited firearm to resume using, selling, buying, and trading these firearms with anyone else who also has a newly prohibited firearm, as though they had their previous classification statuses. This is a compromise which is aimed at reducing division between both gun owners and the rest of Canada. It also has severe economic and criminal justice implications, as the government plans to roll out a costly program at a time when Canada can least afford it, despite the fact that it will just honestly not provide any tangible safety benefits. But even though the document never explicitly uses the word, that's exactly what has a lot of people dissatisfied with the CCFR's plan here. Compromise. Now, I haven't been in this quite that long, but a lot of you have been involved in the fight against the OIC and the handgun freeze for well over 5 years now, and have been funding the CCFR or other groups to take the fight to the government in order to completely dismantle the Liberals' legislative and regulatory attacks against our community. And at the end of all of that, despite all of your support, the CCFR is out here now settling for less than that. Some are saying that this isn't even just a compromise. They're even going so far as to call this outright capitulation. To make matters worse, not all of the issues which people are bringing forth are unfounded. Sure, there are a good chunk of people out there who are simply looking forward to their upcoming showdown with the government, but there are also a good amount of informed criticisms with the grandfathering plan which are not so easy to dismiss, even for those who want to participate. One of the most notable of these is that since these firearms will be prohibited firearms, they will require registration certificates for us to legitimately possess them. So grandfathering leads to registration, and then registration inevitably leads to confiscation. And the gun control types have long objected to these claims and always say that that'll never happen, but confiscation day is already upon us if the Liberals can ever figure out how to roll out their program. But at the same time, one of the primary reasons that the Liberals are going to have such a hard time with the confiscation program is the very fact that so many non-restricted firearms were not registered, and therefore the government is never going to be able to confiscate them all since they don't even know where they are, who has them, or even how many there are. A grandfathering program would eliminate that problem for the Liberals. And after we register for the grandfathering program, a swift confiscation a year or two down the road, or at some point in the future, would be inevitable. And even if some future Conservative government reverses the prohibitions and brings our firearms back down to their non-restricted or restricted status, that would cause their registration certificates to expire as per C21's new regulations, but I doubt that that would require the government to destroy the records of that ownership. So this could become a permanent, long-term axe hanging over the heads of us gun owners. And there are also those out there who correctly point out that a grandfathering has never been reversed. Now, based on this observation, they believe that any grandfathering is as good as permanent, and maybe it is. But that's still got to be a better outcome than our firearms going to the scrap heap or our community facing mass criminalizations. Because destruction or imprisonment is also a permanent loss of that firearm as well. And not only that, but think about what that actually means for a moment. Some people are adamant that this is the wrong move and that we should continue to fight the Liberals tooth and nail and demand that they reverse the OICs and repeal C-21 and undo all of their gun control. To which I say, okay, fair enough, I'm on board with that. I don't hate that idea, and that's effectively the battleground that we've been in for the last 5 years now. But they're against grandfathering specifically because grandfathering implies some kind of permanency. But at some point, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, the Conservatives will have a majority again. All we need to do is to convince the Conservatives to undo the OICs and C-21 and all the grandfathering. But this train of thought implies that that's not going to be possible to do. And for what it's worth, maybe it won't. But what these critics are saying is that they believe they have a better chance of convincing the Liberals to reverse their own ideological gun policies than they have of convincing the Conservatives to reverse these gun control policies. I don't see the logic in that one. Maybe the Conservatives would never reverse a grandfathering scheme, but it's got to be easier to convince them to do it than it would be to convince the Liberals to bring down their own legislation. But at the same time, there is something to be said for mass non-compliance. A lot of the people out there are insistent that if we all band together and just outright refuse, what can the government do? Are they really going to arrest and criminalize hundreds of thousands of Canadians over this? And if they are, how would they even do that? The courts don't have enough bandwidth to deal with all of that. There's definitely no room in the prisons for that kind of surge. So another of these criticisms is that it divides the community. It divides the team. It gives people an out who otherwise might have stood with the others. And so, to an extent, grandfathering kind of weakens our negotiating position. Some are also saying that it gives the Liberals an out and it lets them have a soft win on this and save face against what would otherwise be an absolutely embarrassing and disastrous program. And there's a few more ideas out there than that, but you get the picture. It's not like this is a perfect or ideal outcome, but I would remind everyone that the CCFR isn't exactly calling the shots here. Our community isn't calling the shots here. The government doesn't need our help or our permissions or our recommendations in backing off the confiscation program if they want to do that. Whatever the government does or doesn't want to do, or however they want to play this, that's entirely up to them. We are completely at their mercy and they know it. And that is kind of the inevitable fate of minority groups in a society which doesn't have any real rights or freedoms, or even basic protections of any kind really for that matter. It's easy to forget, and a lot of people do, but democracy alone is not a hedge against discrimination and persecution.
What are civil rights? I'll tell you later. They're hilarious.
So what do I think about all this? Well, for me, I don't entirely hate the idea of grandfathering, even when you weigh it against its obvious downsides. Because there are a lot of people out there who just don't really understand the position we're in. If we're being honest, we've been doing a lot of losing this year. We had the unjustified loss at the Federal Court of Appeal. We had a surprising election loss, which was comfortably projected in Conservative majority territory for almost a year and a half before that. So both of our immediate legal and political solutions to this problem were pulled out from beneath our feet. There are a lot of people out there who simply think that we can demand the government to see things our way, but if such a thing were actually possible, we wouldn't be in this mess. It seems like some of you are hell-bent on going all in on a 2-7 offsuit when you can barely afford your ante. Now, getting out of such a scenario isn't impossible, but you have to play smart and you have to be pragmatic about the situation you're in. Bravado can only get you so far. And it's not like the CCFR doesn't know about the downsides of grandfathering. They would have known all of this and they would have considered it. So I suggest maybe that we put a little bit more faith in the CCFR, because I think it's fair to say that they've earned it at this point. They also have a much wider and a much finer view of the situation than we do. They have access to information that we simply don't. And on top of that, they are one of the few groups in Canada which truly has our community's best interests at heart. Even for the Conservative Party, their support for our community has its limits. Both Tracy and Rod have now said publicly that if the government succeeds in confiscating our firearms, no future government will reverse the gun bans. So if I had to hazard a guess, that may not be merely suspicion on their part. They might have even been specifically told that behind closed doors by the Conservative Party themselves.
All along, we've told people, we're trying to work within the system that we've got, right? And of course, now we've got a new prime minister with a fresh mandate. And I don't know if he's as eager as the last one to come and take our stuff. But what I do know is that if confiscations are carried out and some of our guns or all of our guns start getting confiscated and they're gone, no future government, regardless of how friendly they are, regardless of who's leading them, is going to turn the clock all the way back. So the most important thing we can do right now is to keep those firearms legitimately in our hands, in our possession.
So ultimately, there may not be any true political solution to this issue in Canada unless new political parties are formed. And even if there was, political solutions are only ever temporary, which is unfortunate because our legal solutions don't seem easy to come across either. After seeing how things played out at the Federal Court of Appeal and the level of contempt the courts have for the law in regards to our community, it's going to be a nearly impossible battle on that front too. But at least there, with enough time, effort, and money, we can back them into a corner on logic alone. At least that's the case if and when the courts decide to function correctly. And we already see the beginnings of that happening even though the CCFR lost at the Federal Court of Appeal. I haven't talked about it much on this channel, but Runkle of the Bailey is also embroiled in his own legal battle against the government on the firearms front. Now his case revolves around the so-called nullification of our registration certificates that were issued shortly after the 2020 OIC gun ban. However, the ruling he got from the Alberta Court of Appeal directly contradicted something which was said at the Federal Court of Appeal in the CCFR's case. Basically, in Runkle's case, the Alberta Court of Appeal said that you can't even challenge these nullification orders, even for unnamed variants, but in the CCFR's case, the Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Appeal said that you can definitely challenge these nullification orders of unnamed variants. And the court can only believe one of those two things. Either Runkle's case is right or the CCFR's case is right. And as I understand it, he's also currently applying for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court on this case as well. Although I couldn't find the video to actually put that up on screen for you, but I recall him talking about it. Maybe it was in a live stream or something. I don't really remember. And then you look at other aspects of the CCFR's case. Their judicial review and appeal has all but proven that the government is banning firearms on little more than appearance and ergonomics. And Premier Danielle Smith has suggested that the province of Alberta might take the government to court over the constitutionality of banning firearms on such ridiculous grounds. It's going to be hard for the RCMP to backtrack from their court document saying that they're definitely not legally binding classifications of firearms is based mostly on appearance and ergonomics. It's going to be hard for the government to get away from the RCMP openly stating that firearms and their variants are not being banned based on any kind of mechanical analysis or mechanical similarities of the firearms. It's going to be awful hard for the Attorney General of Canada to take back what their legal team said at the Federal Court of Appeal, when they said that the firearms on the ban list are in fact not assault weapons, that they've never used that term, and that somehow we are the ones that are actually muddying the waters on that front. In their mind, it's just an arbitrary and undefined grouping term which has no alternative meanings. Now that's not an exact quote, but that is basically what was said. So it's going to be awful hard for them to unsay these things if Alberta comes after the government on Section 9127 of the Constitution on the grounds about whether or not any of this is valid criminal law. At least, not if the courts decide to start caring about the truth and rationality at any point here.
I want to have that fight. I want them to try to argue that somebody who is legally purchased, legally used, and never used in a criminal way, a firearm is somehow under their criminal power as opposed to our property rights power. Absolutely. That's part of it, is that I think that there's a robust discussion to have around this. I think that they are misusing their power when they go as far as they do to say that because a gun looks a certain way, therefore it's by definition criminal, therefore they have the power to ban it. I just think that's an inappropriate use of the law.
And these court cases aren't just limited to firearms discussions either. In my opinion, Canadian law actually has a pretty immature idea of what freedom is as a whole, at least since the Charter was signed. But all of that is coming to a front. You see what's happening in Nova Scotia. You see what's happening with Alberta's separation movement. You think of bills like C2's ban on large cash transactions and significant invasions of privacy. Then you have previous bills C10, C18, C63 with, free speech concerns and freedom of the press concerns and so on, and way more topics than just those. People have just had enough. Canadians have had enough. There's a growing craving for freedom from one half of the country, which the other half of the country isn't even aware that they're responsible for depriving us of. I haven't spoken too much about this on the channel as I try to keep the channel fairly firearm specific, but when I think of the tyrants that are ruling Canada, I don't just mean only the politicians. I also mean the everyday Canadian citizens who might even think that they have good intentions. These Canadians are everywhere. Frankly, I even have friends and family members who think it's okay for the government to mandate nearly any restriction, even just for the perception of safety, over the freedom of others. For them, there really isn't any such thing as overreach. Tyranny in the name of safety and compassion lives in their hearts, and they don't even know about it. Worse still, it's a blind spot which you can't just force them to see. Like if you take a look at the recent hiking ban in Nova Scotia regarding their supposed attempts at wildfire prevention, there are a shocking amount of people online who are in favor of it. And that just doesn't even compute with me. Like there's no shortage of people out there who believe that Canadians exercising their freedom are the enemy. That, at least in this case, anyone who wants to go for a walk in the forest is a villain. That going for a walk represents a danger to society for which someone deserves to be fined or even arrested. And of course, the government insists they're doing it for our own safety and for the greater good and all that. But when did freedom stop being the greatest of goods? What greater good is there than freedom?
But the reality is, it's not that you might cause a fire. It's that if you're out there walking in the woods and you break your leg, we're not going to come and get you.
There has also been a lot of work in the last few years put in by various individuals as well as constitutional lawyer groups like the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms and the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Now they lose more than they win, but their wins are not without their impacts. And one such win was the Emergencies Act ruling at the federal court, which the CCF participated in. Then Christine at the CCF has also spoken up against this safetyism in a recent video of hers, which I thought was rather excellent, and there's a link in the description below where she talks about the hiking ban. And the JCCF is already backing individuals also targeted by the hiking and wilderness bans. So when you look around, there is definitely a rising desire for freedom in Canada, as well as a functional way to get there, albeit a slow one. This desire will likely outpace the radical tyrannical types in Canada at some point, if it hasn't already, but thus far the courts have been very resistant to stepping in front of the government in order to protect our freedoms. However, if the government continues to behave like overbearing helicopter parents towards Canadians, even the courts might eventually clue into the limitations of the current precedents in safeguarding our freedoms. So, back to the CCFR's grandfathering plan. Yes, there are downsides to grandfathering, but from where I'm sitting, it still looks like the least bad option in a world where there are only bad options right now. But what I'm also trying to help you see is that there is a much bigger picture going on in Canada right now, and our firearms are only one front in that battle. And one of the things I think the CCFR is aiming for here, more or less, is to keep the ball in play, which will be necessary if they want to make their case at the Supreme Court. Because if the confiscation program is completed before the Supreme Court hears their application, they may just end up ruling that the case is moot. Not that they should, since the legal questions in this case aren't really related to firearms at all, but if the courts cared to understand that point, we wouldn't have lost at the federal court or the Federal Court of Appeal in the first place. But to be clear, a lot of that is just speculation on my part. I am not in any way affiliated with the CCFR, and I can't speak for them. These are my ideas and my extrapolations based on what I think they're after and what I think the big picture is. Like maybe their vision and the concerns aren't as broad as all of that. So maybe I'm a little off base, or maybe I'm projecting my own beliefs a little bit here. What I'm saying is that there is certainly enough to get annoyed with these days. But remember, the enemy here is the Liberal government. They're the ones putting us over this barrel. The CCFR has done enough to earn our trust, I think. They're out there fighting the battles for us, even the losing battles, even when it's tough or when things look bleak. They're one of the very few groups with the motivation and the means to pursue our best interests in Canada. Because in case anyone's forgotten, this isn't the end.
I didn't think it would end this way.
End? No, the journey doesn't end here.
The CCFR's policy declaration is their endgame. That's where they're headed. Grandfathering is just one more unfortunate step on that path. This isn't a capitulation, and I don't think this is even a compromise. This is a reprieve. It's more like a ceasefire. We're setting up a DMZ. And don't kid yourself, because the government won't leave it at grandfathering alone forever either, but neither will the CCFR. But at the end of the day, it's much ado about nothing. The Liberals are unlikely to ever sign on to this. Like, they aren't even talking to gun owners or consulting our lobby groups anymore. Our minority group is beneath words or consideration from the Liberal government at this point.
We've been lobbying the government in various ways. We have not gotten any response from the Minister of Public Safety's office, but we did get a response, which is we don't need you guys as part of the conversation, from the Minister of Justice. And of course, we haven't heard from the Prime Minister's office either.
And for anyone who's still adamantly against this idea of grandfathering, even after all that I've said, that's fine. You are completely entitled to your own opinion. But I would ask, what do you think should be done instead? What can actually be done to stop this confiscation program? And I want ideas with teeth, with some real meat to them, not just absent-minded suggestions. So if you have any good, legitimate ideas which could have even a small impact, let me know. Like, I can send this stuff up the chain. But at the same time, I'm still a small enough channel where I can read nearly every comment which comes through the comment section. And if you don't have any better ideas, well, maybe the CCFR's plan isn't so bad after all. All that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.